Especially, so Sean and I have been friends for, we think, somewhere between 15 and 18 years. We've been ACNs for all that time, sort of.
Yeah.
Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, Sean Collins.
Hi, guys.
Give me a hand, please.
So, hello, everybody. See a lot of familiar faces from years past. It's good to see everybody. We're going to talk about file sharing performance, and, you know, when I was given the opportunity to speak this week, I really didn't know what to talk about. You know, I don't know necessarily what you guys want to hear. So I went to a few good friends, some large customers, and said, what do you guys care about these days? What's interesting? And they said, you know, file sharing is still a kind of a big problem for us. There's a lot of things that are changing, and there's a lot we would like to know. So I decided to dig in and do a little bit of research and came up with what I'm going to present to you today. Some of this stuff came from inside of Apple engineering. I've removed anything that would be NDA kind of like, but you'll get the ideas that you can take back to your office and implement. So this is me. Hi. If you don't already know me from the stuff that Andy mentioned, I've done a lot of lynda.com courses, which is now also LinkedIn Learning, which was recently bought by Microsoft. So I guess you could say I do some work for Microsoft, which is a very weird thing for me. I've been a very Apple-y person my whole career, so that's kind of odd. And I've also, you know, been an Apple Consultants Network member in the past, and I've worked within this community for, gosh, my entire professional life. So that's a little bit about me. File sharing performance and function optimization. That is a dry title, right? We're going to do our, what's that? Absolutely, absolutely. But I'm going to try to keep this informative. I want to present as much useful information to you as I can so that you can understand how things like file formats can impact your file sharing performance, and what to look for whenever you're trying to tweak performance, and what to kind of ignore as well. All right, so sharing and collaboration. So as I mentioned in the summary on this course talk, Apple seems to think that we don't need file sharing servers anymore, right? Anybody looked at the latest version of Server App? That's weird how they pulled everything that's useful out of that product. It's, and so, you know, it seems that there is this new kind of push towards, hey, you know what, people are going to use cloud storage. We want everything to be more personal. So as an individual, you're going to use cloud-based storage, and that's our entire conversation. What about collaboration in an office environment? What about collaboration in a creative group where you've got editors, or you've got people using Creative Cloud or whatever? There are lots of reasons why personal cloud sharing isn't going to work, right? So file sharing is still a big concern for sysadmins. So Apple's file transfer speeds and share performance are generally suffering at this point, and so that's why this is hopefully going to be interesting. So this is a big point. Every time I go and I talk to people inside of Apple, and I say, well, this is broken. This is materially not working for me. This is not working for my customers. This is not working for the community at large. They always say the same thing. Okay, please go to feedback@apple.com and tell us that. It's super important. Who here's got a membership with Appleseed for IT? Right? Okay, that should be all of you, because that's how you're going to get your beta access to operating systems, right? Who's got a developer program membership? Very good. Okay, everybody who had their hand up has access to the Radar, right? So you can file Radar reports. But realistically, if you're with Appleseed for IT and you have the ability to use the feedback assistant, that is currently the best way to get your information out to Apple. All right, so who thinks that Apple can currently saturate a gigabit connection to the network with a client. Yes? We've been actually able to do that for a long time. We can absolutely saturate. So your NIC's not your performance bottleneck, right? Think about caching server, serving out tons of data, right? You're going as fast as you can go. Think about multicast ASR. Have you seen that go? Serving out disk images across multicast, just dumping data as fast as you can onto the network. The client's able to saturate. It's not the problem. So if you think of that perspective, you really need to start looking at other components if you're experiencing problems with performance. So because macOS can saturate gigabit, we know that the IP stack's not the problem. So gone are the days of modifying, sysctls to modify IP performance. That's just not a thing anymore. So where's your problem? Where is it likely that the way you've built your infrastructure is negatively impacting your client's ability to get data to and from where it needs to be? Your server is going to be where pretty much all of your performance opportunities exist, right? So what you're sitting on is of great importance. You want to think about increasing your NIC speeds and possibly aggregating NICs to get up to higher performance levels, right? Of course, we have 10 gig Ethernet. Who here has servers already in production that have 10 gig E deployed? Okay, keep those hands up if you're running that on a Thunderbolt adapter and not Fibre Channel. Okay, that's about half. This is not that expensive, and it's a fantastic way to improve the performance from your server on file sharing. So 10 gig E. The reason why I asked about the two different options there, the Fibre Channel and the Ethernet adapter, is that you've got 10 gig Ethernet over Fibre Channel, right, which is going to go at 10 gig, but it's not doing the same thing that 10 gig E over copper is doing. 10 gig E over copper has some really unique things going on. 10 gig E on the client, none of us have that yet, right? We don't have a Mac Mini with 10 gig E on the back, right? Well, we don't have an iMac yet that has 10 gig E over copper. But if you were to do that, 10 gig E does some really interesting, smart things with raising and lowering speeds according to demand. So you're going to get really great efficiencies over 10 gig E over copper if it's implementing that on the hardware natively. And macOS is just going to play along with that in High Sierra. Oh, something of note here. If you're using a Thunderbolt adapter, you've got options for Thunderbolt 2 and Thunderbolt 3. Your Thunderbolt 2 options run right around $500 for a unit. Thunderbolt 3, right about $550. You've got options available from Atto, and you've got Sonnet options as well on that. But this is the really fun thing that's coming out, right? We're about to get an iMac Pro, and for the first time, we get 10 gig E over copper. And of course, High Sierra is going to be necessary, new hardware, right? High Sierra is doing everything it can to optimize your transfer speeds for 10 gig E. It's basically just playing along. But because we've got that coming and it's going to be a new standard, anticipate growing pains is what I would say, right? You're going to probably see this being implemented in your environment, and as soon as it does, I mean, what happens when Apple releases some new product, right? It gets QA'd based on what they think use case scenarios will be, and then if your use case scenario is missed in that QA, you're doing the QA. So see the previous reference back to the feedback system, right? This is going to be the only way that Apple engineers find out about your problem, right? You can't have a friend on engineering and be, texting them in messages and be like, hey, I've got this problem. It doesn't work. They've got to have it through their system. So remember that. Oh, and does anybody remember the transition to Intel? Right? Right. How long did that take? Well, but how long did it take for them from the first piece of Intel hardware that they released to having the entire product line running Intel? 9 months, right? I have a feeling that this may be similar. Now, I don't have any inside information or anything about this, but if you look at 10 gig E and you look at what's available from a performance perspective, I think there's a good chance that that will make its way into future product. Yeah? Mm.
So they'll keep selling those MacBook Airs and MacBooks
Mm-hmm.
without giving them the good stuff because that seems to be how they get lower.
Sure.
Which I'd love to agree with you.
Well, and you're not wrong. To that point, easily half the product line doesn't have built-in Ethernet, right? And so you're dealing with Thunderbolt to 10 gig adapters on anything that doesn't have built-in Ethernet anyway, right? I think what you can look for is you've got an iMac Pro coming out, and likely over time, that higher performance capability may come into a redesigned Mac Pro, for example, right? Something that's very long in the tooth, something that desperately needs to be revitalized. And there were some public speeches made around the time of WWDC that said, this is not a dead product, right? I can't remember if it was Craig or if it was Phil, but one of them made a comment in an interview that was public. So look for that, right? This stuff is coming. But this is your way to get one of these things into your infrastructure, get it working, find the bugs, find things that might not perform that well, and file feedback to Apple so that it gets better by the time you get more and more. But this is a great performance opportunity for upping your game. But if you're going to up your game at the client level, you're also going to want to be sure that you've got at least 10 gig E at your server level, right? So this is to the point we were just talking about. That was a great comment. We're likely to see this go across the entire product line, right? And I think the Mac Pro is likely the next place that it'll go. And I think it's probable that it'll end up in iMacs that are further down the line eventually, but that will be added very slowly on iMacs because those are the less expensive, and they've got the iMac Pro, and so it's a great distinction to have that 10 gig E on that system. All right, so what happens when you can do 10 gig E? Because 10 gig E is working harder, and because the CPU load runs high on 10 gig E, you're very likely to see that that CPU performance is going to dramatically impact network performance. This is primarily because packetizing Ethernet is all done on the CPU. So it's important here. Who's seen a CPU in normal everyday use even go above 30 or 40% recently? It's been years. That's good. But for me, with the clients that I support, it's been years since I've seen CPU speed be a relevant performance indicator, right? For a long, long time, it's been, what's the storage, right? Are you on an SSD or are you on a spinning disk? And if you wanted to get higher performance, you would go to flash storage or an SSD. So this is going to be one of those things where if you're running 10 gig E, CPU performance is going to be important, so you're going to want to make sure that you've got your systems configured with the highest CPU speeds possible on the host. What else do we have here? Okay, so tuning performance. If you're running a Mac OS server, you're running AFP, that's one thing, but what you're going to find in most environments today is you're going to find SMB file shares, right? SMB file shares, usually running on a Windows server. And one of the things about SMB3 that's a great feature is packet signing. If you have packet signing turned on, you have enhanced security, and that's great. But because packet signing and encryption takes up CPU cycles, if you want higher performance out of SMB3 specifically, you're going to want to turn packet signing off. You want to turn signing off on SMB3. You're going to see a performance increase as a result. Not saying that the performance increase will make SMB3 perform like AFP, but it will be better. Okay. That being said, SMB1, or original Samba, very, very old, not performance tuned. And so you're going to want to avoid SMB1 and 2 if possible and run SMB3, but again, with packet signing turned off. So does anybody have DFS enabled in their environment on Windows servers? We do. Okay. Fantastic. So on the not fantastic. Are you using Dave to allow your Macs to access the DFS? Okay. 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 Well, the thing about DFS is that the Mac OS doesn't support it. So if you're going to be employing a DFS environment and you're going to put Macs on the network, you're going to need to use something third-party in order to get your Macs onto that system, right? So it's just worth noting. Dave apparently does provide for better SMB and DFS performance. I mean, DFS support and SMB performance. Yeah. You got it, absolutely. I totally missed that. Thank you for that. Yeah. Thursby. BY, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so what if you see different results? What if all of this is just, you go back home, you go back to your office, you turn off packet signing, SMB performance is supposed to improve, you're doing your file transfers and you don't see it, right? Again, going back to this is what I was saying before. Join Appleseed for IT, for sure. Use the feedback assistant. If you've not signed up, even if you haven't gotten yourself into Appleseed for IT, the feedback assistant always lives on all Macs at System Library Core Services applications. And it's keyed into Spotlight. So if you just Spotlight feedback, it'll pop right up. And that is how you should notify Apple about anything that's not working the way that you want it to. There's always feedback at apple.com if you don't want to do that, though. The nice thing about Feedback Assistant is it sends the feedback to Apple with a packaged up report of logs from your system. So if you've got a bad behavior, if you've got something that's happening that just isn't what you expect, do whatever it is that you were doing that fails, pull up Feedback Assistant and file a bug. Hopefully the relevant information will be captured in those logs and the engineers will get what they need in order to fix it. Okay, so why is AFP really going away? If you think about it, how long have we had AFP? Right? Forever. It's an ancient code base. It's never received a ground-up rewrite in its entire existence. It has always just been patched and revised. So when engineering was looking at, and really it's not going away, by the way. This is kind of a myth. It's not like it's not possible to do AFP. It's perfectly possible to do AFP. But we're beginning to see that Apple is ringing the death knell by saying that we can't have AFP if the volume that's sharing the SharePoint is formatted with APFS. They just said, you know what, this is our new file system. This new file system will become pervasive, and we can't host an AFP share off of it. This is all they're saying. But if you look at why, I mean, SMB is supposed to be perfectly adequate, and honestly, Apple's moving away from being a server company, right? I mean, we're not really making a file sharing server in Server App at all. If you want to do file sharing in a High Sierra, open up the system preferences and go to sharing. And that's your option. So, I mean, that's serious writing on the wall, right? But if you must do AFP, you can still do it. This is a screenshot of what it looks like right now in High Sierra. You simply turn it on. The only limitation is that your share has to be sitting on a non-APFS volume. If you still have macOS servers running file sharing, you have several other problems. Who still has macOS servers in their working environment? Wow, that is awesome. You know, that might be a byproduct of being in this room, though. It's a large number of people in the room, but where are we, right? Who updated a production server to High Sierra? Right? Right? Okay. Don't. But you really wouldn't have to worry about that so much, would you? I mean, who's running a file sharing server, a macOS file sharing server? This is kind of fun. I love the feedback thing. On a server where their shares are on an SSD. By show of hands. Okay, boot volumes on an SSD? Okay. All right. Would it be helpful to know how to upgrade to High Sierra without converting to APFS if you're on an SSD on the boot volume? That would be how. You can always run the installer. If you've got it downloaded into your applications folder, you just run that. Inside of the installer, start to install is the process that you're running. And you simply run it with -- convert to APFS, space no. Yeah. Always. Right? Exclamation mark. Absolutely. Okay. So what does this really tell us, especially if we're talking about a creative work environment? I mean, for a lot of us, bless you, for a lot of us, we still have clients that are using Adobe Creative Cloud still, right? I mean, like, what was the thing that got us into Mac administration in the first place? We were probably helping an advertising firm or a marketing company or somebody that had a whole bunch of Macs that were doing a whole bunch of graphic design, and Adobe was always a part of that. Adobe and Quark Express. Still? Very good. Excellent. Very good. So, you know, with Adobe, Creative Cloud is absolutely the way that they want you to go. They want you to have your users grab an individual account so that you can have them logging in with their Creative Cloud accounts. They are going in a direction with their AI that will allow a lot of really interesting things, but only if your content is in Creative Cloud. So this is part of a hybrid approach that I think we're all going to have to get used to if we're not used to it already, right? This world where we're using cloud-based storage for individual work, and then we're also providing file shares for collaborative work on our local LAN. When the users are not utilizing their Creative Cloud to use their content, when they are instead working from a file share, you're probably going to want to use SMB for ease of administration. You can, of course, switch over to NFS if you want to use NFS mounts. That's always going to be better performance, but of course, more overhead on the admin side. It's not as easy to administer. And then whenever your budgets permit or your client's budgets permit, SAN architecture. Of course, this is all assuming you're not sticking to an older macOS server running AFP, which would, of course, also be great. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Right, that's great. Could everybody hear him? That was a really great comment. and I will repeat it. Lots of servers, coast to coast, big installations. The big problem is they can't do this because SMB shares, file shares in general, I'm guessing actually, don't play very nicely with Adobe files and with Microsoft files. Oh, AFP is good? All right. So this goes back to something that's been true for Andy, Ben, Phil, guys that have been doing this for a long time with me. When did we first start hearing from Adobe specifically that users should absolutely, under no circumstances, open a file directly from a file sharing server? Forever, right? This has always been true. This has just always been the case. And the answer...
Designers always hated the reality, but at least 15 or 18 years.
Right. This is old news, but relevant. It's very, very relevant to this conversation. Workflow is huge. I mean, there's performance of getting files back and forth. That's important. But what's much more important is that we teach our users best practices when it comes to opening, transferring, saving, replacing files. We really need to build workflows that allow the users to get the files off of the server, work on them locally, and then transfer them back. That's why back here, the last thing I put in there was SAN architecture, right? Because at least if you've got a full SAN deployed, you've got your higher speeds, but more importantly, it's mounted as a local volume, even though it's shared, right? So you don't get those same problems. But yeah, absolutely, that's been a problem forever. Very good point. Thank you for raising it. Yeah. Sure. Well, this becomes more of a philosophical discussion when we start talking about that, but you may want to think about deploying a DAM system, right? Digital asset management is specifically a thing that exists to solve that. But it's all about developing workflows. I suppose there's probably room for a talk here on, file sharing workflow development, right? Because there's about 1 billion ways to do that. And one of the things that I'm talking about here and recommending, if you look at all of these slides, cloud storage in combination with LAN-based file sharing, and maybe even in combination with a SAN for different reasons, where you've got a different tool to accomplish each of the different tasks that you may have need for. I mean, if you look at what you can do with, here's the thing about Google. If you look at Google Drive and you look at Sheets and Docs and all of that, what you can do with collaboration, Google Drive's fantastic with not just sharing their own stuff, but it's very good with setting up collaboration. DropBox is good with setting up collaboration with different permissions levels and shares and what have you. Some of these tools even provide for a limited form of backup, right? Which is great. There's lots of great reasons to use each of the different tools. They try to differentiate themselves with feature sets, which is great for us because that means we just get more and more features every time we turn around from these things. But bless you again. But we do need to look at what's the appropriate tool for what we're trying to accomplish. And so when you're talking about just flat out file transfer performance, I think if you set up any server that can run AFP and SMB3, you don't turn off the packet signing on SMB3, you're always going to see AFP performing better. It's just transferring files around, right? When you, depending upon, who's got clients or uses it themselves? AutoCAD. Okay, great. Just throw out some information here for me. What are you using to do file shares? What server volume formats are you using? What file transfers are you, protocols are you using? You're using DropBox. Okay, great. Anybody else? Everybody's using DropBox. It's awesome. So, I mean, you know, and things like Dropbox, it's sort of faking it, right? Because you've got local file access. It's just handling synchronization in the background. And that's what a lot of these things are doing. If you've got the desktop version of Google Drive installed locally, same basic idea. Yeah, it can be really, really tough because, once again, with the Adobe thing, the same thing gets transferred over to AutoCAD. Opening the files from a file sharing server can be very problematic because they don't do version control particularly well. SMB is especially bad at this. Does anybody remember, gosh, what was this? This was like 10.6, I think? It was the last version of macOS Server where we had the ability to turn on the checkbox on SMB shares for lockout, for file locks, op locks is the way it was labeled there. Remember op locks? Haven't seen that in a long time, have we? Those were important, right? And ostensibly those were what would allow you to open up a gigantic Excel spreadsheet on multiple systems, and you'd get individual page lockouts because the file sharing server supported it. But we've always had this version control problem on file shares. And the workflow answer to it has pretty much uniformly been either, you know, if you're working with creative stuff or maybe even not, digital asset management system to do version controls. But then, you know, developing a workflow to let them bring things local. I think it's really important. And then, of course, SAN, to fake being local while also being collaborative. So you still have an Xserve in your shop. We already kind of talked about this and laughed about it. Leave it where it is, right? Let it do its thing. It'll keep performing as well as it's performing right now going into the future. It's not like the Mac has lost the ability to initiate an AFP connection yet, right? So keep it running and plan for the future and you know, just think ahead. Again, this is what it looks like right now. I just grabbed this off of my local laptop because really that's all we've got available to us right now. It's just whatever anybody would have been able to set up in prior versions of the OS, just open it up in file sharing. Very limited administrative capabilities because Apple doesn't want us to be a file sharing server anymore. They really don't. It's incidentally the other, I'll just rant on this a little bit. Anybody set up caching servers before? Right? They're pretty magical and awesome. They were kind of my reason for installing macOS servers for the last year. And that's now no longer in server app either. It's now down here under content caching at the very bottom. That's one of those ways that we absolutely know that we can saturate gigabit because that service performs so well, it's ridiculous. It's also very complicated. Would anybody be interested in the future in a content caching session? Raise your hands. Yes? No? Maybe? Okay. Think about that. Anyway, that is all she wrote as far as this is concerned. Are there any questions or other topics of conversation anyone would like to raise? You want to talk about content caching? Actually. Okay. How much time do I have, Andy? Oh,
You've got about 15, 18 minutes.
Oh, great. So we got
So
plenty of time.
you could start again and like do the whole prezo one more time.
Sweet. Go ahead, Donald.
Excuse me. Actually, Sean.
With a previous version server, the glory days of being able to run the server app on a different OS and then write ACLs, you know, connect into a different server, write your ACLs from that other computer are long gone because we all know it completely freaks out if you try and do that now. So how are you able to write those?
Right. So POSIX and ACLs, if we go into the Wayback Machine, nothing has changed at the file system level as far as that's concerned, right? So your POSIX are your owner, group, and everyone permissions. Anything that you add beyond that is an access control list, entry in the access control list. The ACEs get pushed into an ACL that's created whenever you create that first additional person in the list. So when I just did that, I just created, essentially, an ACE in the ACL. Love acronyms. And that's pretty much what you get, right? I mean, you get those are your options. And there's not much more to it. As far as the rest of your question, does it inherit things that were previously on the file system anyway? Nothing is rewriting the permissions on the file system. And while I didn't test it directly, there is absolutely nothing in my mind that would have changed that. There's no reason to believe that it would. If you've got other experience, please tell me, but I don't believe so, no. Are there any other file sharing questions in particular, specifically? Yeah.
Coming.
Hold on.
So I had a comment about the things that need to be upgraded for 10 gig Ethernet to work. There's like this thing in the middle that you didn't mention, but that I think everybody in the room realizes, and if you don't, the networking has to be upgraded too. So if you,
Oh, yeah, clearly. Absolutely.
so-
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I had a last minute thing with my presenter notes not being able
Right.
to be, so I kind of was going off the slides in my memory of my presenter notes because
Sure.
my eyes suck now.
But the
But
upgrade.
yes, that's absolutely a great point.
Yeah, Apple introducing the iMac Pro in the environment is going to now suddenly consumerize 10 gig Ethernet, and that will start driving your network teams to upgrade the switches because you're going to be cranky that it's not going as fast as it should.
Right. And you'll also really quickly start to realize that your servers need to be doing better than 10 gig Ethernet, right? And whenever you do this, you always, this is just a thing about server administration. You always want the server's networking to be as good as or better than your client's networking speeds, right? I mean, that's just sort of, just kind of goes without saying, I guess. It's just sort of a math thing. So yeah, networking concerns, but also not just your switches, right? There was hold on a second, let me see if I can find the note, because it was really kind of important information.
Well, Sean's looking, I'm sure, it was only a few weeks ago that we discovered a client had a 10100 switch in a closet that we didn't even know about.
Yeah, switches.
Newer client, to be fair, but still.
Switches, knowing what your connection speed on each of your switches is from end to end is important. But this is what I was going to read to you. So, and I apologize for just reading it, but connect to 10 gig infrastructure via Cat6 or Cat6A copper cabling at distances of up to 180 feet for Cat6, 328 feet for Cat6A cabling. You can have, and then I've got a couple of actual cost examples. Sonnet twin 10G Thunderbolt 2 to dual port 10 gig Ethernet is, I did a quick Amazon lookup, it was $482 when I looked it up. To do the same thing with Thunderbolt 3, about $550. So that's about the cost that you're looking at per system that you would roll it out to. Yes?
I think it's still very common, even if you have Cat6 or Cat6A even in the walls of a client, you might find Cat5 patch cables either on the switch end or the device end.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or punch downs, right, exactly. Yeah.
Again, end to end, knowing what is connected from.
We've even seen Cat6 cable with Cat5e patch bays, which doesn't quite make sense if you have a real wiring company doing the work.
Right. Say that again? Couldn't hear you. Well,
If they're anticipating, if they're putting in new cables, but they're not ready to do the switch, but they're anticipating that need later, the cost between 5 and 6 is not that significant, so they.
right.
And the cost of patch cables, I mean, when you're ordering them in bulk, it's like $3 or $5 each. So if someone says we can't afford it, like, really?
Yeah.
There's a certain movie studio in town, I won't name them, but they have gigabit Ethernet terminated with token ring connectors in some of the buildings.
Wow.
What, no thin net?
Yeah. So there's an interesting takeaway from all of the comments that are coming out, and that is that if you aren't the cabling vendor, choose your cabling vendors really wisely. A lot of your long runs, all of your long runs are going to be custom terminated. And if you've got less than well-educated network techs, they could be putting, I mean, you know, even if you look just Cat5 versus Cat5e, it's very easy to put a Cat5 end on a Cat5e cable and just kind of ruin it, right? So.
Our gating question for anybody wanting to use a wiring vendor is, are they using a level 3 tester? Because invariably, they go back to the electrician who says, oh yeah, I've got a tester, and it's essentially a continuity tester. Does it light up at each end? You put a level 3 tester on it, and you discover really what's going on, and that's a whole different story.
Right, and those testers are expensive.
3,000 to 6,000.
Right? Yeah. Go ahead.
So if there's already fiber in the building, is there any limitations on existing fiber that would need to be upgraded to run 10 gig?
Oh my God. So, I am not a fiber expert. I will just say that outright. But there are so many different iterations of fiber, it's ridiculous. If it's fiber in the walls, it was likely run for a SAN. Correct me if I'm wrong, anybody who knows this better than I do, but it very well may be multi-mode.
Yeah.
Right? And, you know, it's going to depend upon what you've got on either end of that. And I would not just sort of blindly say, oh, I've got fiber in the walls. I don't need to think about that from a cost perspective in going to upgrade. Also, honestly, I probably wouldn't think about doing 10 gig Ethernet at this point in history over optical anyway. I would probably just go with a Cat6a rewiring and call it a day, because it's going to be great, right? It's going to be great. You don't have any of the concerns about running glass that you have with fiber. Stuff's fragile. Anything else?
Any other questions? Answers?
File sharing, wiring, wireless.
Just a quick note, Tom Howland with Helios Software. We have a free utility on, if you're talking about performances, you need a way to measure it. So there's a LAN test utility which can be downloaded, Windows version or a Mac version. And so that's for network throughput testing.
Yeah, I mentioned Thursby in this, and a gentleman from Helios came up to me earlier, and he's like, keep in mind that Helios is out there. They've got their own custom AFP stack. They're still running SMB1, not SMB3 yet, but if you want to run AFP off of a Windows server, Linux server, Mac server, Helios is an option.
The other thing that's come up a few times recently is the new access points, especially going towards AX, most of them have now 2 gig ports. So if you have a wired infrastructure that delivered 1 gig port to each access point, you might have to double them up so you can get the 2.5 gig or close to 2.5 gig that these access points are capable of.
Yeah, and it's increasingly important to do that because you're likely going to have 30 to 50 devices in a high-density deployment that are connecting up to that access point.
And more access points because you need to be closer to the delivery of the...
Right, right. And with 3x3 MIMO radios, they're really able to go. I mean, even if you're narrowing your channels down as low as they can go so you can increase the density of your deployment, you're still capable of very, very fast speeds and multiple clients connecting at once, which is very different from how it used to be, where it was basically, okay, everybody shut up. I got to listen to this one thing. I can't multitask at all.
Actually, Jeanette was talking the other day in the pre-con session about the decision of whether you turn MIMO off, MIMO off, that it might actually be better, depending on channel width and the other considerations that you're talking about, to go back to single.
Yeah. Not that we're going to talk too much about Wi-Fi, but yeah, Wi-Fi is interesting. It's complicated. I really am sad I missed her presentation. It was probably awesome.
Any other questions? Sean Collins.
Actually, you guys wanted to hear a little bit about caching, yes? Sure. And if I've got a couple of minutes, we can just
Rock
look
on.
at it. So sorry about the scale. Things are a little bit off. But anyway, so content caching was moved over here. And, you just sort of turn it on, and it's on, and that seems cool. And you've got this options button down here that doesn't do a whole lot. Can take quite a while to start up, and we'll wait for it to finish. There we go. So, press options, and if you have nothing else, if you have no advanced features configured, you basically get this storage tab, and it's a sort of one-tab wonder. If you want to look at your own systems, you'll see that. The way that you get to the more advanced features is, of course, the way that you get to advanced features in everything on a Mac. See how that button's changing whenever I press down my option key? Right, and so we now have the ability to control storage. We can also do all of the control-y things that we were able to do with Server App, along with some new stuff that's kind of interesting. So clients, everybody here, you guys already raised your hands, you've already deployed this. Deployed in an advanced network scenario is what I'm more interested in. More than one subnet being served. There you go, got a few hands, that's awesome. For those of you who have not, caching servers are really interesting in that they are kind of a zero config thing. You could turn it on, this is one of those things where you drop it into your house, you turn it on and it just works and everything's awesome, right? But if you're putting it into an environment where, let's say you've got multiple VLANs or multiple subnets and you want your caching server to be in one and you want it to serve others, you need to tell the caching server what you're doing. You don't need to configure the clients at all. You do, however, need to give your DNS server a string of text, and we'll just create a completely random, come on, doop, 2, right, why not, right? So you will need to give this DNS configuration to either your Unix-based DNS administrator or run this command if your DNS administrator is running on a Windows device. If you're taking pictures of this for future reference, keep in mind, it writes it for you. It's really, really easy. You don't actually need to. So this PRS thing right here is just that IP address range that I just put in. The only thing you would need to have your Windows DNS administrator edit is that zone name thing is not actually zone name. They would need to put their zone name in there. You know, again, bind looks like this. This is just a line that goes into a TXT record if you're on a bind server. And what that does is it tells the clients that there are servers that are serving that larger public IP address range. And this is if you're caching contents for devices using local networks, custom public IP addresses, right? So this is about clients. Over here, you can configure custom information about peers, servers that are going to peer with it. And this is interesting. The caching server will automatically peer with other caching servers if they're all on the same subnet with no additional configuration. This would be where you would need to put in other IP addresses or IP address ranges of caching servers that would need to be serving other ranges. And then this is probably the more interesting thing here, where we have now the ability to do parent IP addresses, where we can configure a caching server to only pull cached content from a specific cached server that is somewhere above it in your network hierarchy. And when we do that, it will do so based on the settings that are set on that server. And this is probably the most confusing thing about this interface. So the top box is where you configure this caching server to go and look at a specific parent. But the one below here that I have selected right now is where you configure the parent policy on the parent caching server. So this is what you configure if this server is the parent. This is where you configure which parent this server will look to. And it's not made clear in this interface that that's what's going on. But that's, you know, pretty much what it does. Hold on one second. If you want to cache iCloud content, this would be specifically of really, really great use if you're in an education deployment and you have students that are using shared iPad. So you got maybe a cart of 30 iPads and you got kids cycling through a classroom and you know, there's 7 different kids using it. If you're using shared iPad, that user information is coming down potentially, if they're using a different iPad than the last one they used, is coming down into a sort of silo or data partition on the iPad. And all of that is coming from iCloud. So if you have iCloud caches on your network, the data can come down from your cache server rather than coming down from Apple servers. It's useful. And if you want this, so just since we're taking a little tour here, sharing the internet connection is a way to enable tethered caching. which is an entirely different thing. How much time do I have now, Andy?
As much as you want.
Oh, well, that's kind of awesome. Has anybody set up?
Well, lunch is starting, but I think everyone in the room is probably
So there's lunch, and
reasonably
I'm
interested in what you're
way
talking
off
about.
topic anyway, so, if y'all want to eat,
This
go
is
eat.
becoming a lunch and learn.
There you go. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there any logging or stats related to the content caching in the client here?
Oh, that's such a great question. So, no, it really, really is a great question. And I would like to remind everyone that there is a feedback assistant, and that the more feedback Apple gets on something that's missing, the more likely they are to correct that, say, missing bit of feature set. Yeah, you used to be able to issue a command line thingy to make the server, we were talking about this earlier today, to make the server report what the IP address was of each client that was hitting the caching server and requesting content. And this was a great way to tell which of your subnets were actively using your cache server, right? Because otherwise you're just getting a connection, it's not logged where it's coming from, and it's somewhat more difficult. Yeah, that's gone now. It'd be great if that came back. The more comments that ask for it, the better. We used to have a really nice graph. We had a great chart in the server app that would report on, just made it sort of look really nice and pretty, right? This is how much content's coming from me. This is how much content's coming from my peers. This is how much content's coming from Apple. Gone, right? That would be a nice thing to have. And I don't see that as being a third-party development opportunity, by the way, because there's not enough people using these things to make that a profitable thing.
I might have missed it, but can you specify where the cache is being stored?
Oh, God. Hang on. That's a great question, but I don't remember off the top of my head. I believe it is here. No, yeah, it would have been before. Here it is. There. So we'll go here and I'll show you that way. Yeah. So library application support, Apple Asset Cache.
But I can't put that up to a USB drive to keep it off the boot drive.
You used to be able to.
I know.
Yeah, I would not recommend hacking your way around that.
Okay.
We can do all kinds of clever things, but then whenever things get changed in the future, our things break. So I would recommend that you get out the feedback assistant and you file that as a thing that you would like to be changed. What is the expected behavior? What is the observed behavior? Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for raising it. That's another great thing to say.
Any other questions, comments?
You could move the cache location, and you still can. You're absolutely right. I'm so sorry. It's actually in the system preferences right here. But of course, you can right there. Storage used. Oh no, wait, not storage used. My bad. Yeah. No, you can. I just can't
Do you have
remember
to
where it
option
is.
click that button?
No. No, you can't. You know what? I do not remember where that is now.
I have it up right now on mine. It's cache location, and there's an edit button right next to it.
In your, oh, I don't have any, yeah. No, you're absolutely right. It is in that location. I don't have an external volume attached. Right, it's contextual. Right. Right.
This is why you come to MacTech.
Right? No, that's a very good point. Love the community, love you guys. It's so good to see everybody again.
Sean Collins, please give him a hand.